Hi everyone, today is January 16th. We are SIG Multicluster. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. Irfan, do you want to kick it off?
Yep. Thanks, Christian. So today on agenda, there is nothing very specific except there was a pending item since a couple of weeks that was, I think Gotham is working on STO, and he would want to talk a little about what they are doing and whatever probable overlap there might be. I have a small update on Federation, what we are doing, and if there is any update about cluster registry, we can have that also. So I believe Jonathan is there. I did put that as the first item.
Yeah, I'm here.
Jonathan, you want to update something, or we can? You want to skip this? Yeah, one update for sure is there that I think your v0.0.2 was cut out this week, which was relayed in the group mail. Apart from that, anything else is there you want to say, or?
Not much. There was a conversation late last week between some of the people who've been, most of the contributors to the cluster registry talking about looking at moving the API towards beta and what steps are necessary to do that. We're going to write up the results of that, and then when that's actually in a more full fleshed out form, we will share it out with the SIG. Not necessarily expecting comments, more sort of FYI, but of course anything we share out with the SIG, people are totally welcome and still look at. We're not going to block on SIG comments for these things since they're more sort of like fleshing out the milestones we had already decided on together as a SIG, rather than making new milestones or something. But of course, comments are always welcome.
Okay. Yeah, about Federation, we have been discussing about the API in the Federation workgroup, which happens on Wednesdays, same time. Apart from that, we have been working on some issue fixes. The PRs are there against the repo. And after much discussion and talks with test infra guys and all, we sort of concluded that this release we'll name it as v1.9.0 just to keep it simple for the users so that this release maps to the K8s 1.9.0 release. And so far, we haven't seen any breaking changes in K8s API. So whatever head of Federation is there, it actually works pretty well with 1.90 and the latest of K8s also. There was only one point which I am not sure if it's worth mentioning. That is, however, the libs from K8s, Federation is still rendering an older version. There's already an open PR which is bumping it up to one of the latest. But if I'm not sure if it is relevant for the mapping, but I still mentioned if there is any point, if anybody has some point about that. Yes, and I see a good amount of attendance over here. So in last work group sync, there was a question raised about backward compatibility. So right now we are sort of saying, and for future we are saying that Federation would be only forward compatible. For example, if we say 1.9.0 release, it will be compatible with K8s 1.9.0 or future releases, but wouldn't support any of the previous ones. That means that with this release of Federation, users won't be able to federate the older version of K8s clusters. So if anybody has a use case which might need that, then we'll maybe think about it, or otherwise we'll completely drop that point for now at least.
Just to be clear, Irfan, there are two version compatibility questions. The one is, what do we remain backward compatible with the previous Federation API, which was essentially the Kubernetes API? And the other one is, what versions of Kubernetes clusters are we able to federate across with the new version? And so could you just clarify which of those?
Yeah, so I'll clarify a little more. So currently, if we see that until Federation was maintained with inside K8s, the Federation release was being done with with K8s. So there are two points here. One is maintainability of those older releases. So they are anyways maintained, and Federation release also is maintained. But there was no claim earlier that we made that, for example, Federation, which is released as part of Kubernetes 1.8, will certainly be compatible with Kubernetes Cluster 1.7 and Kubernetes Cluster 1.6. It wasn't documented or claimed anywhere. Okay, but yes, it did sort of work most of the times with even at least 2 versions older of clusters. So the question raised here is that, do we want to or need to make that claim anymore? Because this is also relevant because
Is he gone away, or is it just me?
No,
I don't hear him either. Hopefully he'll come back.
okay.
Sorry, was that about me?
No.
For a change, no, Paul. We weren't talking about you this time.
I had said that I had something I thought that we should share on cluster registry, and I went to get an AC adapter. So
Okay, no problem.
I'm not being overly egotistical, just the right amount.
We were talking about backwards compatibility of APIs, and I just raised the point that there's a distinction between backwards compatibility with previous Federation APIs as opposed to backwards compatibility with different version clusters that could be federated with the new system. So Irfan's disappeared. In the meantime, maybe I'll just talk briefly about that. So I think we do need to support more than one cluster version underneath Federation control plane. The reason for that being that there has to be some kind of reasonable upgrade strategy for a federation of clusters from one version to subsequent versions, and you can't upgrade all the clusters and the federation simultaneously to keep them all in lockstep all the time. So I hope that is in line with what we have been proposing. Or if there are any disagreements on that point. We don't need to have, be able to arbitrarily support all previous Kubernetes versions, but we need to have, more than one that we support so that clusters can be upgraded at different times.
We're talking about backwards compatibility or forwards compatibility?
They're kind of relative to where you are in time, I guess. But I mean, concretely, if you have Federation, let's call it version A, supports, Kubernetes clusters version 1.1, then at some point, Kubernetes latest release is going to go to 1.10, and Federation release is going to go to version B, and there has to be some reasonable way to get from Federation version A with Kubernetes clusters 1.9 and Federation version B with Kubernetes version clusters 1.10, let's say. And that cannot be an atomic transaction. That has to be a gradual thing where the Federation control plane gets upgraded before or after the clusters, and the clusters get upgraded not necessarily all at once, but potentially in serial.
I mean, we've had discussions about this, and I think the outcome of that was that Federation can only reliably be forwards compatible. So Federation at a given version can support, like 1.9, for example, should be able to support 1.9, 1.10, 1.11, as long as the Kubernetes API is, has some reasonable guarantee of backwards compatibility. Federation can rely on that. but it doesn't go the other way. So Federation 1.9 can't really support 1.8. If you want to upgrade to 1.9 Federation, you have to upgrade all your clusters to at least 1.9. Does that make sense?
It does, and so firstly, I think that's probably okay, in the sense that we could say you have to upgrade all of your clusters before you can upgrade Federation. I think that's okay. I don't think it's ideal, and I think that it's potentially feasible to do better than that. In the same way that I don't think that is the case with Kubernetes. For example, the nodes, I don't think have to be strictly ahead of the control, the rest of the control plane, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I think there is some degree of backwards compatibility there.
Right, but it's kind of a different scenario, like the nodes versus like the way that Federation works. If you add a new field, like it's backwards compatible, somebody with an old API basically will get whatever default behavior that field represents. But it doesn't really work the other way. Like if I have a newer version and I have a new field that I populated in Federation and then it gets propagated to an old cluster that doesn't have that field, the behavior, while it could be compatible, it's basically undefined and would have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So yes, it's possible, but I don't know that it's necessarily.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't rat hole on that. I agree that we can do it in stages, and I think the first stage you mentioned, where all clusters have to be upgraded before the control plane gets upgraded, is a reasonable first step. Has Irfan made it back yet, or is he still AWOL?
Yeah, I did make it back, and I'm not sure where I lost you guys. So, but I got these 2 points like after whatever discussion happened. So yeah, this talk has happened that Federation can remain forward compatible to some X versions, which is not defined as of yet. And we can certainly take this upgrade scenario as case-by-case basis. If that kind of a scenario comes in and we face a problem, we probably might attack that problem at that point of time, rather than continuously discussing about the same stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
So, the answer to this question remains as that we don't make any claim, but even if you take the versions today, whatever we are going to release today, most likely is going to work with at least one earlier version of Kubernetes release. Because so far we haven't had any API changes which might break this compatibility for the objects which Federation federates. Okay, next point in the agenda I listed was, do we need to have some sharing about the API related work? We had the discussion in the Federation work group earlier, or just for the sake of the wider audience, or we skip it and take it in the Federation work group sync only?
I think it's relevant to sort of summarize, but I don't think it's, I think we should continue iterating until we get to something that we have.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, then I'll update some sort of summary over here. Carry forward some notes from the other sync notes to here. Okay. Anything else which either is relevant to, or any questions which might be there for either for cluster registry or Federation?
I think Paul had something he wanted to talk about. Right, Paul?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that right now the cluster registry API is cluster scoped. And I think there are a couple reasons why it will be likely that we change the existing API to be namespaced. So for example, cluster scoped cluster resource is not useful if you want to differentiate the auth credentials used for different users of the cluster registry API. So that's a potentially big change. I just wanted to call it out.
Okay.
Sounds superficially very reasonable to me.
As a superficial guy, I accept your endorsement.
Okay. Okay, then we can move on to that sync or some talk about Istio.
Thanks, Irfan. Yeah, I'm Gautam. I'm from the
Hi,
Istio environments group. And just to, I'm not quite sure how familiar folks are with Istio. I'll give a one-liner on what Istio does. Istio is basically a platform to allow that allows services to communicate with each other, and irrespective of where they run. So it could be any cluster, any cloud environment. It could be running on-prem. It could be running against multiple kinds of registries. So Kubernetes is not the only service registry that we talk to. We talk to Console, Eureka, and a bunch of other Cloud Foundry and a bunch of other registries as well. So the reason I thought this was important for us is because this quarter we want to roll out Istio for multi-cluster Kubernetes. And there are basically three concepts, or there are three areas that I would like to discuss on. The first one is very simple. It's using the Kubernetes cluster registry. Initially, we were actually going to come up with our own service, and then we very quickly decided, talking to Christian, that the right thing to do was basically adopt the cluster registry. And I'm really elated that 0.002 is out, and we'll probably be using that. If you see any issues or anything that we need to do differently, let us know. Prior to this meeting, I'd actually had a bunch of meetings with Christian and folks, and one of the things that we were debating on was having sort of fake clusters within the cluster registry, one for Console, Eureka, things like that. That is not decided yet. Most likely, we are just going to be using the cluster registry for Kubernetes clusters. And all the other registries will, based on the environment they're connected to, there will be an API machinery server that we talk to. In the configuration of that, we'll be configuring other registries like Console or Eureka or Cloud Foundry, etc. So we'll try to keep it as clean as possible. We'll not try to, murky the waters here. And even if it gets to that, we'll definitely communicate with you guys saying that, hey, we want to put annotations. And again, we'll be using the standard annotation method for extending Kubernetes cluster registry. So hopefully it should not rock the boat as far as Kubernetes or Istio go. So that was an easy one. The second aspect of what we are doing is service discovery across multiple clusters. And if you look at the document, there are actually two ways we are proposing this. One is that you have, so I'm not quite sure how familiar people are with Istio. But what we do is we have a component called as pilot that talks to multiple registries. And that is one mode. So we might be talking to multiple Kubernetes registries and getting the information and exposing it to services within that particular environment. The second mode is where we basically talk to what's known as a remote registry. And that's where one pilot talks to another pilot. And that's just the means for sharing service endpoints, more or less. We are not basically sharing anything else. But that's what we are doing. And that's the second piece that I thought might be of interest to this community. The third piece deals with DNS, because when a service is exposed in, let's say, a remote registry, we are forced to sort of create the DNS entries for that local environment. And right now, we're just basically keeping that as an interface. We'll be using kubedns for kube environments. But it's not quite clear whether we'll be supporting other environments that do DNS, and that is still an open question. But for this quarter, we are focusing on kubedns, sharing of endpoints across pilots, and using the cluster registry. So if anyone has questions on this, feel free to ping the Istio team. The Istio Environments Working Group is the right forum for this discussion. And I'll leave the forum open for any questions.
So,
One
yeah.
question
Yes.
try to clarify here is when you speak about endpoints, these are all Istio endpoints, and in a multi-cluster scenario, are you assuming that they're all reachable? In other words, is this on a single flat network?
Fantastic question. Sorry, I've just got a bad cough. The answer is yes. This is, so I don't want to use the word flat network. I think I've used that sort of, very liberally in the document. But we are trying to move away from what we call as flat network because it just creates a lot of confusion for people at Cisco and a bunch of other places where they have pushed back. But what we are basically saying is that all endpoints available from one pilot to another pilot, that is one Istio environment to another Istio environment, these are deemed to be reachable. Now, what this means is you could technically have a proxy in one of the environments and you will only be exposed the WIP of that proxy to the other environments. And you won't be able to directly reach, let's say, the workloads behind that proxy, but you should be able to reach the proxy. So that is the only condition that we put on endpoint discovery, that they have to be reachable one way or the other. Now, we've yet to basically put in things like, exposing WIPs, which are sort of, egress, ingress WIPs, which are very tailored to the source and destination network. And we have not yet gotten there yet. But that is really for Q2 and Q3 is where we'll be addressing that. In fact, I think at the end of Q1, you should be able to see some proxy configurations come up, and what we are calling as a zero VPN network. That's also being done as part of the networking group and the environments group. So either of those could be the destination for your queries. Did I answer your question?
Which is my question, yes.
So, Gautam, you would have whatever you shared and would want this forum people to know about.
Yes.
Can you put a link of that over here?
Absolutely. I'll do that in a second.
Yeah.
I'll do that in a second.
Sure.
I just had one clarifying question I'd like to ask if there's time. So it sounds like the main objective of this Istio integration is to expose essentially Kubernetes and presumably non-Kubernetes services to pods in the cluster. Is that correct?
That is sort of correct. It's basically any workload, and we don't distinguish workloads to be pods. They could be VMs. They could be, any particular workload. We are not restricting it to only Kubernetes workloads, just to...
Okay, but any clients of focusing on the Kubernetes part and ignoring for the time being the other pieces, console and whatever integration, it would be exposing Kubernetes services to Kubernetes pods and any other clients than Kubernetes pods. Is that right?
Yes, and the motive is to do this seamlessly. So what we are trying to do for hybrid is have consistent authorization policies, consistent service policies, things like quotas, things like destination policies, routing, things like that. So,
okay.
But from an Istio perspective, these are basically canonical services. So they may be a namespace service, for example, in Kubernetes, and they may be just another service in console, but they would still be the same mesh service. So what we are trying to do is rationalize it at a mesh level and have a consistent set of policies for services across the mesh, irrespective of the environment or container orchestration, workload orchestration, any of these, clouds, for example, or whether it's on-prem. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. So my follow-up question was just, so you have no expectation to actually control any of these services. So to create new services or scale existing services or do anything like that. All you're doing is exposing the ones that are created by some external agent.
That is correct. We are not in the business of orchestrating workloads. If that is, I hope I have answered your question on that. Yeah, so we are not in the business of like spinning up VMs or orchestrating workloads or any of that. We are depending on whatever existing mechanisms already exist, and we'll be heavily working with the Kubernetes team to make sure that that works for us. And I think it's already working for us. So we don't have any complaints yet.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah, I actually had one question, but I'm not sure if we want to tread those waters right now. Um, uh, how much of an overlap does Istio and project like whatever multi-cluster federation would have? And I mean, I'm not pointing it only to you, Gautam. I think I'm just pointing this question to maybe get some pointers from the rest of the folks also over here.
No, it makes tremendous sense. In fact, that's the whole reason I'm here. So, and in fact, going forward, we're going to have a bunch of other people from the Istio environments community. This is just a kickoff. I wanted to just get this started, and then we'll be inviting Costin and Andra as well to this. But from an overlap perspective, I think there are a bunch of things with a bunch of presentations that I saw relating to service discovery, and I think it's not so much of an overlap because these can be disjoint. Remember, at the end of the day, we are talking about Istio services, and Istio services can be a group of services in Kubernetes, could be anywhere else. So as long as we are on the same page as to how these endpoints get exposed, I think we should be good. But
Okay.
So I think we are fine there. I don't see any major problems. Like for example, if you've got workloads that go across multiple clusters, right? And they are, let's say, part of the same. So you have even today, for example, you can have workloads that run in different availability zones. And you have the master in one availability zone and workloads in other availability zone. Those kind of things, they are already taken into account as far as what we are doing, which means that there is no overlap. But if you guys are planning to do things like multi-cluster, suppose if you're basically saying that you're going to expose endpoints from one cluster into another cluster, and these are totally disjoint clusters, then there might be things that we need to talk about, and there might be some little small level of overlap. I'm not too worried about it, but we need to keep an eye on it.
I wouldn't expect that going forward we're going to try to have things too tightly coupled anyway. I mean, the existing service discovery mechanism is DNS based. The nice quality of that is it's not really dependent on the network that you're using for any particular cluster. It just makes things IP accessible if they happen to be, if they have that connectivity already. So I mean, having that sort of agnostic solution versus something that's very specific to the network that's defined for a cluster, I think those are totally different problem domains, really.
And that is correct. I don't want to murky this discussion too much, but I just want to point out that DNS is just our first level of discovery and mostly to address legacy applications. But once we get to the resolution through the proxies or through the sidecars will actually be able to make a much richer decision on how routing should take place. So for example, we'll be able to say that, hey, we need 10% of our traffic to go to version 1, 10% to go to an experiment, and remaining 80% to go to the rest of the fleet. So you can do those kind of things based on attributes of the endpoints. And that's what we are going to be demonstrating by the end of this quarter.
Okay.
So DNS is just our first level entry, just so that the sidecar can basically trap traffic and then make sense of the traffic and then know what to do beyond that. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I think that's clear. I mean, I wasn't really trying to question what you're doing or what.
No, not at all.
It's more that just I mean, the DNS-based solution that exists today is just like, it's really kind of at a much higher level, and it maybe
Yes.
solves some problems. But I mean, for example, it doesn't really have anything to say about how to enable private cross-cluster communication.
Yep.
So I think for me, it's, if someone wants something with the characteristics that Istio is providing, they'll have to use Istio. If they want something simpler, or they're constrained by an existing legacy cluster or whatever, they have other solutions. And my hope would be is that we can have different solutions with clear use cases documented, so people can pick the thing.
May I know who's talking, please?
Sorry, this is Maru from Red Hat.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Maru, you exactly summarized that. My intention of asking that was that in future meetings or whatever overlap in discussions that we have, we ensure that the use cases that we are addressing are disjoint. We are not solving the same problems. Okay, so
Hey, this is really exciting. I just want to say I'm looking forward to trying this out and seeing how the routing would work between different clusters with Istio. I definitely have a lot of questions as well, so I don't know. I think someone already mentioned maybe there's a design doc to look at the details.
Oh yes, I was just about to put the.
Also, for those who have not taken a dive into Istio, a lot of the development uses the Kubernetes API machinery, so it'll seem familiar to you. It's CRD based pretty much as they explore their options before 1.0. I'm not sure what the 1.0 plans are, but right now a lot of the APIs are just CRDs and should feel familiar to anyone who's done API work in Kubernetes.
Yeah, I had a quick comment. I thought everyone was ignoring me, and then I realized I'd been muted for the last 10 minutes. I gave a brief amount of thought to where the integration points might be, and it seems like it would be useful, as Maru alluded to have multi-cluster or federation tools be able to delegate the service connectivity to Istio in cases where people wanted that, or use an alternative. But it seems like the multi-cluster or federation tools can focus quite squarely on actually managing the Kubernetes entities outside of the service discovery part. And that seems like a sensible integration point. So I can quite imagine us building tools to, spread services across multiple clusters, and then, ask Istio to tie them all together and make them discoverable and connectable and load balanceable and all that stuff. That make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and that's pretty much what we are trying to aim for hybrid, anyways, where you can have different sort of operators, and like Kubernetes could be one set of operators, and similar you could have operators for on-prem and for other registries. That's how we envisage it, anyways. So it falls perfectly in line with what you just described.
cool. Okay, so we move ahead.
Yep.
Yeah. So this was one item which has been there since the next meeting post last KubeCon Austin.
It's okay.
So
Yeah.
So if there is any point in talking, or there is any update which might be relevant or useful for people who could not attend that, that is fine. Otherwise, I just kept it because it was there in notes from last 2-3 meetings. And last 2-3 meetings did not have that amount of attendance as today's one.
Yeah, I can speak to some of those. We gave updates, 2 instances of SIG updates at KubeCon. One had a few questions asked. The theme was basically people wanting to understand where we were headed, so we hope we clarified that. But people generally wanted us to have a better, more informative presence, at least on the Kubernetes website, to be able to identify particular use cases, because we presented some use cases. Some people in the audience could relate to them, but they felt like it would better serve our purpose as a SIG if we could document them and kind of reduce that barrier to entry for people to get engaged. That was my major takeaway.
Okay.
We also had a side discussion with Oracle. Since then, we've asked them if they wanted to join the SIG. They have, I think, 3 projects that they are considering in incubation. That they want to move into incubation. I'm not sure what the status of incubation is right now. I think it's still not fully fleshed out. I think it's still suspended by the steering committee, but their hope is to get under incubation. And they essentially have developed 3 different products, or at least they're reflected through repositories, which recycle some of the federation ideas. At this point in time, I think they are prototypes. That was my reading of it. But they were certainly engaged in some of the discussions we had, and we just told them that they should expand their audience and come and present at the SIG. So at this point, the ball is pretty much in their court.
Yeah, I guess one brief thing to add to that is that it seemed like one of their priorities was to kind of move ahead as fast as possible with the work they were doing, and they were, if I can paraphrase them, a little concerned that, doing it in the context of the SIG might slow them down. So if we do want them to work here, I guess we need to figure out how to not hold them up.
Right, that's a good point.
I'm not sure that we can necessarily do anything to enable any particular vendor. I mean, there's a trade-off, right? Like you can, if you want, you can build your own thing and you can cross your fingers and hope that other people find it compelling, or you can try to collaborate and run the risk that consensus building takes time. I think there's like technical things that you can do to work around this, but it seems to be, in my own experience, like part and parcel for doing open source is that if you want to collaborate, that means you need consensus, and consensus building just takes time. I would definitely welcome anybody working in the space to come to this SIG for sure.
Yeah, sorry, Paul. I should specify and say, well, when I said good point, it was an important point for them. I don't particularly subscribe to that point of view. In fact, that's probably why I forgot it.
I mean, if you got all of the money in the world and you can support the development cost of something, great. But for a lot of us, priorities means that we want to actually do more with less.
Okay. So yeah, so on today's agenda, this was what it is. We don't have anything else to talk. We would be finishing whole 20 minutes only.
Yeah, I mean, I note that the last Federation Working Group meeting was quite lively and extended beyond just Federation topics. So for those who come at the SIG meeting, we try to give a general update, but this update is not as specific or as technically inclined as, at least from what I remember, the last 2 Federation Working Group meetings have been. Now, the Federation Working Group meetings are supposed to focus mostly on the Federation control plane, but since we're discussing kind of broad topics as well, it's probably worth mentioning that some multi-cluster use case discussions have happened in the last 1 or 2 weeks.
Also, I've noticed meetings aren't being recorded. is that I just haven't noticed the recordings or that they're actually not being recorded, because if they're not, then I would make a request that they be recorded and posted.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's just an oversight. We can try and do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Meeting
figured it
being
was
recorded at the moment?
Yep, I'll try to do that from
Okay,
next
awesome.
meeting onwards. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I assume that you should be able to. I don't know. I mean, I think, I'm not sure if you're able to record the meeting if there is no host present. I think Christian has been going pretty regularly, which kind of obviates that, because then we will have a machine that can run as host and do the recording, but I'm not necessarily certain what happens if there is no host present at the meeting recording.
Yeah, I just realized that on this, I don't have a recording option on this.
No,
Just looking.
actually, it's currently being recorded, and for Zoom, by the way, yes, hi, I'm Nick, and I'm here like quite, like I've been here for just a little while, and I'm just starting with Kubernetes now, Federation. But anyway, so for the Zoom, you can set up the meeting so that it automatically starts recording, and you can also set it up so that it can start without a host. So in that case, whoever logs in, the meeting will start, and it will start recording automatically. And then the host, whoever has scheduled the meeting, will get an email with the link to the cloud where the recording will be.
So we've done we've done one of those. We've set up the meeting so that it does not require a host in order to join. We have avoided setting up auto recording. I think at least one reason around that was a concern that I don't know if there are legal ramifications around having the meeting automatically recorded when people join, without having some sort of disclaimer beforehand of like, this meeting is always being recorded. I don't know if that is actually a problem. I know from what I've seen that either it was talked about in documents or we've always mentioned, hey, this meeting is being recorded almost immediately after clicking the record button. So I don't know if there's any issues around automatically recording the meeting.
I would suggest, I think that the strong recommendation to all SIGs under the Kubernetes organization is that all the SIG meetings are recorded. And I think we can put it at the head of the meeting discussion in minutes. I mean, if we can get Zoom to start off the meeting by saying this one is recorded, I think all the better. But even if that's not possible, I would be comfortable going ahead auto-recording. And as best we can, we try and remind everyone at each time. But all SIG meetings are essentially recorded by default. So I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody.
Okay, I mean, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. Before going and clicking that button in our site, I might go check with Contribute Experience or sort of the community leads to see if that actually is a reasonable expectation or if there's anything that they know about that where that is an issue, just to make sure.
Sounds good. Do you think you can have that wrapped up by the next meeting?
Yes.
Cool.
Maybe not.
So that next meeting is tomorrow, actually.
I don't necessarily know by the meeting tomorrow, so be prepared for tomorrow to record the meeting, depending on who is available and who's out. I may not be able to get the confirmation that I want by tomorrow, but certainly by the next week's meeting, Federation meeting, I should be able to get that.
Is there some way this meeting, I mean, I think we can have some rights on the meeting also. So is there some way one of the guys, or if Christian is attending tomorrow, then it's perfectly fine. Otherwise, some rights can be shared with either of the guys who attended, Maru, Irfan, Shashi, either of those guys.
I mean, I don't know. We can look into that and see. I don't know what rights are available to share. I also don't know if there's a way to provide limited rights rather than just sort of a blanket everyone other than the host rights.
Okay.
Something to potentially look into.
Okay, fine. So if it doesn't happen tomorrow, then probably from next week onwards, we should be able to record this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay, I don't have anything else on the agenda which we want to talk. Unless anybody else has any other point, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, can I just go ahead and ask, I don't know who knows, but how many people are actively working right now are
Probably
actively
just
coding
open
on
it.
the project.
Can you repeat that? And is that
Yeah.
all?
Yeah, no, it's Nick. It's the yeah. So I was asking how many people are actively coding right now in Kubernetes? Like
You mean multi-cluster, this SIG?
yeah. This yes.
I think the best way to get a definitive answer there is to just go and have a look at the GitHub repo and look at the PRs.
All right.
Well,
Okay.
the qualification there is that previously all development was centralized, and that would have been reasonable. But today, you have at least federation and cluster registry, and that's probably going to grow. I would say that coding, we're kind of in a phase where there's a lot of planning for kind of the next phase. And so the amount of coding that's going on is less. There's more planning and design that's going on. If you show up at the working group discussion, if you're interested in the federation side of it, you'll get a better sense of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So see you guys next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.